The story behind finale, ER, next on Pop.
It was the in-your-face medical drama that shook up prime time and made Thursday night's appointment TV.
It just happened overnight. The show hit the ground running.
Yet it almost never made it to air.
He said, we don't have any notes because it's never going to go on the air and I don't want to waste your guys' time.
We've got the exclusive interviews and stories on how this Emmy-nominated show became an incomparable ratings champ.
It became the #1 show in the country fairly quickly.
I had no idea where it was going to go, but it really felt like this was meant to be.
Made 6 unknown faces megawatt stars.
In a word, life-changing.
This was the job that changed my life completely.
And became a pop culture phenomenon.
All of a sudden, we were off to the races, and there was no holding the show back.
From the nurse that almost didn't make the cut.
She was too good to kill, obviously.
To the star that kept everyone's ego in check. We're revealing all. This is the story behind ER. In 1994, a groundbreaking medical drama forever changed television, introduced us to a fresh-faced cast, and took viewers on an unforgettable 15-year ride. It all began with a screenplay written by best-selling author Michael Crichton, based on his experience at Harvard Medical School.
ER was sort of a wonderful coincidence, really. Michael Crichton had written a script called Emergency Department, ED, as a film.
ER started out as a feature film that Michael Crichton wrote for me to direct. And, Michael was sort of telling the story of his experience as an intern.
Michael originally wrote the screenplay in the early 70s. Spielberg was intrigued with his script until he got wind of another project the novelist was working on.
One day, I just asked Michael what else he was writing. Was there a book that he was writing? And he said, yes, I'm writing a book now. I can't tell you anything about it except it's about dinosaurs and DNA. And I was so struck down by this nutshell of a concept that for a few seconds ER totally left me, and I kept pumping Michael for information beyond dinosaurs and DNA. And he said, I'm planning to bring dinosaurs back to life for the 20th century. And that was it. That was the end of ER, for me, in any case. And ER went on the shelf, and Jurassic Park became my next movie. That's just how these things happen.
After shelving the project, the director decided to revisit the script with a different direction.
I loved ER, and I'd always said to Michael, we can make 4, 5, 6 sequels out of this. If the first movie's successful, we can make a whole series of ER movies. And that got me thinking, well, why can't it be a series of television episodes as opposed to just a series of films? And brought it off the shelf and dusted it off and gave it to my TV guys.
Spielberg's production company, Amblin Entertainment, began development on the medical drama as a TV project.
I was running Warner Brothers Television at the time, and I got a call from Tony Thermopoulos, who was running Amblin's television group at that time, saying they wanted to send the script over to us, and they would like John Wells, who was under contract at that time, to do this show.
They sent it to me, and I read it, and Michael and I got together for lunch and kind of hit it off. We had the same ideas about how to do it, and then spent the better part of 18 months being turned down by every network in town.
We ended up at NBC. We, as Warner Brothers Studio, we go to NBC with a project and we say, okay, we have this script, Steven Spielberg, Michael Crichton, and John Wells attached to it.
It started with a pitch meeting. Steven Spielberg was in the room, Michael Crichton, and John Wells. So it was a pretty impressive group, and they certainly had our attention. And what they talked about was a screenplay that Michael Crichton had written almost 20 years before. It was over 180 pages. There were well over 100 characters. It was all over the place. It was a wonderful mess.
When I first read the script, I loved it. It was exciting. There were a lot of stories ongoing. It felt like a big Dickinsonian novel. There were, tons of characters, and it was really just about their work. It wasn't so much of a soap opera. It had all different kinds of interesting things going on.
It was an amazing script. It was truly one of the best, if not the best, drama pilot scripts, or at that time it was a feature film script, that we had ever read.
It felt like we were in an ER with these doctors in this chaos.
But not everyone at NBC was convinced this captivating script would translate into a successful TV show.
There was a lot of debate at NBC. My boss was like, "You're out of your mind."
The real hesitation about the piece, the reason nobody wanted to buy it is they thought there was too much going on, and that we didn't do traditional storytelling. We dropped stories, we started stories, we came back to them later. One of the executives at NBC said to me one time, you know, everybody loves going to see the movie Speed, which was out at the time, but nobody wants to see it every week.
I think part of it was the unrelenting pace, the perceived violence of the emergency procedures. The blood certainly was accountable for some of the grief at NBC. And I just think no one had ever seen anything like this before on television. It wasn't like, there was no precedent for it, that the network could comfortably sit back in their grand recliners and say, this is going to succeed because that succeeded 5 years ago. And this is a clone of that. This was a clone of nothing.
My feeling was, why don't we offer them a 2-hour movie, a backdoor pilot?
It was right during the time that Michael and Steven had just done Jurassic Park, so they felt that even in failure, they'd be able to sell it to an audience as a film.
And they said no. So they went elsewhere. They shopped that package to the other networks. I was lobbying everyone I possibly could, trying to get them to see that NBC would be the right place for them. And eventually, everyone was running out of time. If they didn't land this show somewhere quickly, there was just no time to shoot a pilot. So they said yes.
We got no better offer from the other networks and made a lesser deal with NBC.
They greenlit us very, very late in the process. They had wanted to make a lot of changes in the script.
Michael Crichton was adamant about not making changes, but since it was written almost 20 years prior, producer John Wells contacted his childhood friend and Harvard medical student, Neal Baer, to update the script.
He gave me my first job on China Beach as a writer, and then I went to medical school, and he contacted me, which and sent me the pilot script for ER. When I read it, I said, this is just so interesting because it focuses on what we're going through as doctors in training, but it was outdated. There were no glass IV bottles anymore. There was no chloramphenicol, an antibiotic that was used back then, wasn't used anymore. So John asked me to give him some notes on how things could be updated.
We had about 5 weeks between the time we were picked up to when we were supposed to start shooting.
The task of casting the ensemble cast began.
We were in a hurry, the script was picked up late, and it was a mad rush to get the right cast put together.
George Clooney, who wasn't an A-list star at the time, was the first actor to officially sign on as emergency room pediatrician Doug Ross.
I remember the casting process like it was yesterday. George Clooney had been under contract to Warner Brothers for a number of years.
That deal meant he was only available to Warner Brothers projects that pilot season. We were doing many Warner Brothers projects at that time, and I remember thinking that George was right for a lot of them. He had been on a show of ours called Sisters.
He's very smart, and he was always looking for good material, so he would kind of go around and find things. So we just had been picked up, and he called me and said, I want to come in and read for this part.
When I was finally able to get him to come in, his agents positioned it so that he wouldn't audition, but he would meet. So we met, and at a certain point, George and I had kind of signaled each other that he would be willing to read one single scene. And so I asked him, as if it was spontaneous, if he would be kind enough to read a scene. He was willing to, and we read one scene, and it was fantastic. We had read people previous to that, but they melted into the woodwork instantly.
When it came up that they wanted George Clooney to play Dr. Ross on ER, all of us were saying, let's do it. It was a very easy decision. He was talented and sexy and attractive. He just had the energy of somebody that would be in an ER.
We actually had another Go pilot at NBC. We sent him the 2 pilots, ER and this other pilot, which is about 2 lawyers in San Francisco. George wisely, even though the role in the lawyer show was much bigger, said this ER script was fabulous.
I think he felt he needed to because he was perceived as a leading man in kind of a lighter mode. You know, I think they were looking to try and find some sort of a magnum PI kind of piece for him to do. And he wanted to prove that he really had the dramatic chops.
After the break,
Noah Wyle came in and was not actually our first choice at the beginning.
find out how Noah Wyle won producers over during his audition. Plus, Anthony Edwards says no to playing Dr. Mark Green.
When they offered it to me, I said, well, I can't.
And later, the pilot episode receives mixed reviews from NBC executives.
I said, they're nuts. This is the best pilot I have ever seen.
When the story behind ER continues. With George Clooney set as emergency room pediatrician Doug Ross, producers look to experienced actor Anthony Edwards for the central role of emergency physician Dr. Mark Green.
ER came to me like most things do to actors, is that your agent calls and says, here, there's an audition, there's a thing going on, a project. And at the time, I was actually about to direct a little kids movie. And I was 30 years old, and I was thinking, well, maybe I'm kind of done acting for a while, and I think I'll concentrate on directing.
I think the interesting thing about how Anthony Edwards got cast was just completely by accident. John Wells stopped over at my office to say, how are you doing, how's it going? And I was like, you know, we're getting started. We had piles of pictures, and it happened that at the top of the pile of pictures for Dr. Mark Green was a picture of Anthony. It was an absolute accident. And John said, hey, that's a good idea. So we brought him in the first session.
My wife and manager at the time said, you really should go in and talk to these people. This is Steven Spielberg, Michael Crichton, and John Wells. And it's like, oh, okay, well. And so I had read the script, and it read so unbelievably real.
When Anthony came in to read, it was heart-stopping. We gathered at NBC in Laurie Openden's casting office, and Anthony really ripped our hearts out. It was pure and clean and raw.
Anthony Edwards did not compete against anybody. He read the part. There was no way anybody in the world could ever be as good or better than what he gave us that day in the room. And we all knew it, and we knew he was Dr. Green.
And we're like, yeah, let's hire him.
He came in and auditioned for us, and then he wanted to direct a film that got picked up, so he was not going to be available to actually do it.
When they offered it to me, I said, well, I can't really because I'm going to direct this movie. And that's when my manager really did step in and said, I think we can delay the movie for a few weeks.
So we grabbed him, and we shot very quickly, and he literally left from the last day of our shooting and went to direct this small film that he was doing.
Anthony Edwards was the heart of the show. He was the center. You know, he was the doctor you always wished that you had. And a great actor, brought great integrity to the material.
I had no idea where it was going to go, but at the time, it really felt like this was meant to be. John and I just immediately understood what we were trying to do with that character, and I think kind of my ability to kind of underplay and be a relatable character in which the audience could come through was something that I do and that John needed in the show so that we could go on these adventures with all these other spectacular characters.
Producer John Wells was already a fan of actress Sherry Stringfield long before she took on the role of Dr. Susan Lewis.
I auditioned for John Wells for something else that I can't even remember. And then, I don't know, didn't hear about it or whatever. And right after that, I got NYPD Blue.
Sherry I had seen and loved on NYPD Blue, and they had just announced in the press that she was leaving NYPD Blue, so I kind of called her on the side and said, do you want to do something else? And she said she would be interested and read it.
I read it and I went, that's not a normal medical show. I haven't seen anything like that. And I was really intrigued by the character. Like, people were cool. You know, I was like, these are like people I know, or, you know, people in med school, and they were real people. It was so raw. It had that raw feeling. And I auditioned, and then it just like, you know, it's all just right when everything lines up.
She came in with that great earthy Texas regular girl, kind of beautiful tomboy, and just landed perfectly.
I remember it like yesterday, being in the room, and right as I'm about to go on, and I'm like, oh God, I am so I'm sweating. I'm breaking out in a total sweat. And I walk in the room and it's like Michael Crichton's like center stage, who I had read all of his books. So I was like, this guy's the coolest dude ever. And it was like 20 people and I was like, whatever. And then like 2 hours later, they were like, yeah, you got it. It was, you know what I'm saying? Just when the universe goes, yeah, this is yours.